Ernie, look, I have got my Christmas sweater on.
It's beautiful.
Branding, thank you, my dear. Branding of a product, branding of a group is very important. And we're going to talk about the Rolling Stones. This is our
Uh,
second installment. I can't wait to hear what you have to share today.
well, first of all, I love your sweater.
Thank
It's
you.
most Christmas sweaters are not that cool, but that one's pretty cool. And yes, thank you so much again for giving me a second chance here to talk about something they did a long time ago, many Christmases ago. And it's really funny because it was around that time, that things happened. Jesus Christ Superstar had just happened for me. And I was working at Norman Levit in an agency on Madison Avenue, which was, again, I was fulfilling my dream. And, I got a call from the headhunter. And, I was at that point, I think I'd mentioned I was tired of jumping around from job to job. He had already put me and placed me two different times. And his whole thing was to place me long enough to not have to pay the money back and then move me to the next one. It was like having a show dog, and you take them to all the shows and you leave them just long enough to get the award. And then you make it out of town and they never see you again. So I was very reluctant to go on this interview. And I went. He was calling my wife, Bonnie, during the day when I was at work, telling her that, if I didn't do this thing, it would be a big disaster for my career. This was going to be and in a way, it's funny because he was right. Had I stayed where I was, I would have never, we all do that. If I wouldn't have gone down that road, when I wasn't speeding, and I would have stayed where wouldn't have got the ticket. It was one of those kind of life things that he really did know what he was talking about. Because for me, Jesus Christ Superstar was big. Okay. Decca Records was big. And I was very comfortable, again, like I was at, Carolini and Associates when I did Dolls Alive. And so, I ended up going to this interview and, we had talked about it before where I had showed the Dolls Alive stuff. And after I had shown the Jesus Christ Superstar package, which was the main reason why I went there, and when Greg Braun, the guy that I was interviewing with, said, well, this is really great. I'm very familiar with Jesus Christ Superstar. Everybody's talking about it. What else have you got? And I said, well, that's really, the only real album cover I ever did. But I did do this promotion for International Paper Company a year or so ago. And, we did a record and I showed him the Dolls Alive Octagon package. And he pulled out the record and on the label was the Pair of Lips. And we had talked about this. I went upstairs upon his suggestion of putting a tongue on the outside of the lips. He thought he could sell it to the Stones. And so I did that. I added some teeth. Took me about 15 or 20 minutes, went back downstairs. He took it over to Marshall Chest, who was at Andy Warhol's factory in Lower Manhattan. And a couple hours later came back and basically said, okay, you just designed the logo for the Rolling Stones. And it was great. And so there was about a 2-week period because I didn't want to leave where I was without giving notice because I had become a valuable asset to that agency with the Decca account. Okay. And I think part of the reason that I was so immediately accepted was because I did have the relationship with Bill Levy, who was the creative director at Decca Records. So here we go again. The two guys that had left and started their own agency and was going to take Decca with them. Now, months later, the new creative director is getting ready to leave and take Decca Records with him again. So poor Norman Levit, who was just trying to save his agency in that account. But I was so blown away by the youth of the people that were working there and the enthusiasm and the energy, that it had. It wasn't Madison Avenue. It was young, up and coming music people. That were young and long hair and, it was just incredible. It was like feeling very comfortable and at home. And I remember that feeling. And that's why I agreed to leave, but I didn't want to leave the agency I was with without any kind of notice. So I took 2 weeks. And during that 2 weeks as a freelancer, I created the art for the Rolling Stones stuff. Okay. And when I was told, okay, well, you've done the logo for the Rolling Stones. And I figured that, okay, I did the logo for the Rolling Stones, so it's going to be everywhere. And after that, I had done that art, and I had gotten a couple of other projects. A Love Grows project for Columbia Records featuring a half a dozen different albums. It was a counter display. So I did that. And then when my 2 weeks was up and I had left the agency, Bonnie and I went back for a quick visit to California, came back, went to work, and right away I was designing all the merchandise, all the patches and roach clips and posters. I did a beautiful foil die cut poster of the tongue, foil with red and black and white printed on it, and it was, and those went in the record stores. And then I came up with, Craig had commissioned to do these little cloisonne pins, as you see over here. And he needed some kind of a delivery mechanism. And, he had already started working with a jeweler to do these little cloisonne. They were baked cloisonne pins. So I came up with the idea of doing a stylized version of the album jacket with the pants opened up, and on the insert that pulled up and down, it's just this top part right here that was on the counters. This other stuff was all the different merchandise that I did, that I sort of put the two together for this purpose. But and so what that was as you see all these little tongues, these little cloisonne pins in there, that sleeve lifted up and the pins punched out. Okay, they punched out because they were inset into that. I think there was like a dozen and a half of them or whatever, and that went on a counter in the record store. Okay, and there wasn't a whole lot of that stuff going on. Certainly not merchandise. There was those kinds of counter cards for record sales, promoting Jackson Browne's new album, and it would be a little counter card. There was nothing really like this that had been done before, where it was, and if there was anything, like most record stores would carry roach clips and stuff, and they would have them in a case. You were looking down through the glass case at the cash register or whatever. So this was a very unique piece. It had an easel on the back that stood up. So so that and it wasn't where the consumer could reach it. It was where the consumer could see it. And then the person behind the counter would get it and pop them out and sell them that way. It came with a chain. And, so that was, and I created the Licks logo, which looked like it was like on underwear where it says Calvin Klein or whatever in the little square things. I created this Licks logo, and that became the display. And then I did this ad that you see over here. On this side, this was an ad that was a women's breast with the cloisonne pin between it, and it was "Get Your Licks," and that ran in Rolling Stone magazine, which was really pretty cool because, not only was I working in a cool place, but I was getting stuff put in Rolling Stone magazine. We had become pretty good friends with the people at Rolling Stone, and actually did a bunch of different ads and different things for Rolling Stone magazine, which was really kind of neat. We did a whole college promotion for them one year. It was very, very an interesting time. And so I went on for the next, I don't know, I would say the next 3 months, doing all the merchandise and stuff. And when the album came out, I was like, I went to the record store, got the album, and turned it over, and my logo wasn't on it. It was John Pichet's logo, real small down in the bottom right-hand corner of the package, right? And then I guess when you pull the sleeve out, there was a big version of Pichet's logo with lyrics and stuff printed over it. And so I was kind of disappointed because I thought that it was going to be my logo on everything. But, like I said before, it didn't really matter whether I was the chicken or the egg, just to be one of the two, to be, Pichet did a great version of that logo. I think it much more reflects the Rolling Stones than mine. Mine's very stiff. And as you can see behind me here, I've got pictures of all the guys in the group wearing my logo on their tour shirts, because it was not only used as all the merchandising, the roach clips and everything else that I did, but it was their tour. It was used on the backstage passes. It was used on their shirts. It was used on a lot of the merchandise that they sold, was my version of the logo. So, again, it was kind of like a blessing and a curse at the same time. I was hoping that it could be on everything, but so so elated that it was just one of two. And really, what most people don't understand, and I've actually posted my version, Pichet's version, and Craig Braun's version, and they're all three different. And there are people that look at it and go, "Oh, they're all the same." And I just don't know how that could possibly be. But some people aren't as, I guess, meticulous viewing things and drawing conclusions, because the reality is the Stones used both logos exactly at the same time. One was used for all the merchandising and tour stuff. The other one was used on the album, so it really, it was really like I said, it didn't matter whether you had the chicken or the egg. Both were necessary. Both were needed. Both had a place. And if there are some people that want to believe, and that's one of the cool things about this Gold Mine magazine that we had talked a couple of weeks ago about how, that really kind of, it doesn't really say, Ivor was very smart in what he did. He didn't really approach it as a very, very slighted one way or the other. He was very objective about all of it. And basically what it was, hey, there's a few sides to every story. And here's 3 or 4 different sides. You make the decision, which I thought was really very clever. I mean, I don't care whether it was Pichet's or mine. I know it was one or the other of us. It wasn't Ruby Mazer, and it wasn't Alan Aldridge, and it wasn't all these other people that, try and take credit for something they didn't do. It's one or the other. And to be either the one or the other one doesn't really matter to me. I mean, it's just the fact that I was one, of many. So anyway.
I was laughing too, Ernie, because when I was before we were chatting, I was looking at those logos and reading some stories, and even Andy Warhol was even interjected into the mix as a possible person who, had the design of the logo. I'm like, oh no wonder there's all this.
Yeah, well, what Andy Warhol had was his contribution was the Polaroid. He had a Polaroid of Lou Reed's Lover. That's Lou Reed's Lover in the front cover in the Levi's. And Andy Warhol was very notorious for taking Polaroids. He took Polaroids of everything. And I remember having that Polaroid. I had that Polaroid. Okay. I also had a Rough Tracks from Sticky Finger and a cassette. And I didn't, I had the cassette with me years later, but I don't know what happened to that Polaroid. I remember having it in my hands because it was up in the art department, and I was up in the art department and sort of had my hands on everything because now at this point I'm the creative director. I was hired full time a couple of weeks after I had done, a couple that Stone's Tongue and a couple other projects. That's why, it after 35 years, the rights come back to the creator. That logo is over 45 years old, 50 years old, whatever it is. So, I have the rights to my version, and my version was art that I created. So I wasn't working for the guy at the time. So, which is, kind of why I ended up with all the artwork that I have in my collection from Pacific Pioneer, because I owned the company. Everybody was employees of the company. But I never failed to give everybody credit that needed to have credit, which is something that I didn't get. And I knew that. I knew that when I walked away, with the vice president of sales and the head of production, and now the creative director are leaving, it was kind of like what happened to Norman Levit happened to this guy. And you know what? It happened to me too. When I became so dependent on people like Drew Struzan and Bill Garland, I mean, working with those guys was amazing. That 3.5 or 4 year period was probably one of the highest exhilarating, years of my career. I mean, and I really cut my teeth on that, as did they. And, once that's gone, there's an old saying, you never appreciate what you have until it's gone. Well, I felt what they all felt, so it just didn't happen to other people. It happened to me too. But the difference is that I had the ability to draw back on what I could get from me to keep going. People like Norman Levit, he was a business guy. Craig Braun was a salesman. He wasn't an artist. I mean, Yet he didn't draw anything. He had good ideas, because he knew that if I could create a board package, that he could sell to a record company, he could make more money. So, I mean, he was very smart. I mean, he was very smart, and it was his idea to put the tongue on the outside of my lips. It wasn't me going, hey, I could put a tongue on the outside of these lips and it would be great for the Stones. I mean, it was him, and I don't hesitate, even him, giving him credit. I think credit is important. If somebody does something, they should get the credit for it. And slowly but surely, it's happening for me now too. With thank God for you and some of our neighbors on the block here, most of them who really keep an open mind and understand that there's other sides to it. And I've heard Craig's side. It's a scathing letter that's in the Gold Mine magazine article, which is great. I mean, I had no idea that he was going to put that in there. We were saving it for the book, and all of a sudden there's this scathing article about how I'm a drug addict and I had no idea what I was doing. I had nothing to do with anything, and he did everything. And then I told you, years later I connected with Tom Wilkes, who ended up getting the design credit for everything that I had done at Craig's, Cheech and Chong, Alice Cooper, the Rolling Stones, and we laughed about it because Craig had told him that he did everything. He didn't. My name didn't even come up once. And luckily, we had a mutual friend, Tom Pope, who was a writer who wrote for me and actually worked for Tom when Tom was creative director at A&M Records. Tom Wilkes was creative director at A&M Records. He did the Monterey Pop Festival album. He did the Tommy album. The guy was very, very talented. And for years, I disliked him. And Tom Pope put us together. And the day he did it was like peas and carrots, man. It was amazing. We laughed. I mean, Tom Wilkes was a real character. He was really, and he told me about how, Craig came on him at the wrong time. He had been drinking and he was working on the Tommy album. And Craig said something. And Tom stood up and punched him, knocked him out, and that was kind of the end of their company. But I mean, it's funny how payback's a bitch, but you put it out there, you can guarantee you're going to get it back. So I was very blessed, and isn't it a beautiful holiday season? All our neighbors have the lights up and stuff. I mean, the block looks beautiful. I think that I always felt that people should keep their Christmas lights on all year round. It just makes you smile. Makes you feel good,
I fully agree with you, Ernie.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, just for all of the wonderful stories that you've shared. And I'm surprised how many of them that we've done together.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah. And you know what? Here's the good news. The good news, hopefully it's the good news. There's 10 times, 50 times more. I mean, we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg yet.